Welcome Jade Hurley to this interview.
Thank you, Drongo Jack. Love the name.
Jade, can we begin where you actually grew up?
Well, I grew up in Banksia in Sydney, the southern suburb of Sydney, and ironically enough, 100 yards. I lived 100 yards in Judge Street, Banksia, away from Reg Lindsay, and he was my idol in those early days, and in those early days as well, all of a sudden we started hearing people like Buddy Holly and Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard and Elvis Presley and, for God's sake, even Debbie Reynolds singing Tammy. Do you remember that? Which was, believe it or not, was my first ever single that I went and bought. Debbie Reynolds singing Tammy. My brother still says to me to this day that it was Buddy Holly singing Oh Boy, but I think it was Tammy, Debbie Reynolds. But anyway, those are the days.
And now, before we go on, your name is actually John.
That's right.
Now, how did Jade come about?
Well, I was with my bodgy and widgy mates in those days. If anyone doesn't know what a bodgy and widgy is, you're too young, right? So forget that. I was with my bodgy and widgy mates, and we found ourselves one Saturday afternoon at the Alawa Hotel. Alawa was about 3 or 4 suburbs away from Banksia, where we lived, and in the beer garden of the hotel was a band, and they had a talent quest there. So we all sneaked into the beer garden in the Alawa Hotel, and I was only 14 years of age at the time. And in those days you had to be 21 years of age, but I was only 14, and I had this ability to hear the latest Buddy Holly or Jerry Lee Lewis song or whatever it might happen to be on the radio, and be able to sit down at the piano and be able to play it. And so because of that, all my bodgy and widgy mates, they entered my name in the talent quest. And the big hit record of the day was Jerry Lee Lewis singing "Coming Over Baby," a whole lot of shaking going on. And anyway, a bit after 3 o'clock that afternoon, I'm drinking schooners of beer, and in those days it was like drinking a keg, let me tell you, because God, it was a lot of beer, and no wonder I don't drink anymore too much now, but anyway. And the compere yelled out, "The next contestant, ladies and gentlemen, is Johnny Hurley, and he's going to play the piano and sing." So they threw me up on the stage, and old upright piano there, and jumped all over and kicked the keys and jumped all over the piano and sang, "Come on over baby, a whole lot of sugar." Would you believe I won the talent quest? Would you believe what the first prize was? A 10-shilling note, brand new 10-shilling note in those days, and another schooner of beer, which I needed like a hole in the head. But anyway, unbeknown to me, going past the pub that afternoon, coming home from after doing a show in Wollongong the night before, was Johnny O'Keefe. And anyway, straight after I came off stage and had the schooner of beer after winning the talent quest, I was feeling really sick. So a mate of mine raced me into the toilet, and I got my head in the toilet, and I'm throwing up in the toilet, and next thing we hear this on the toilet door. And my mate said, "Excuse me, mate, my mate's sick here," and he said, "It's Johnny O'Keefe here." And, well, here I've got my head in the toilet, Johnny O'Keefe at the door, my mate standing guard and everything like that. Anyway, the long and the short of it was Johnny O'Keefe. And he gave my mate his phone number and said, "Give me a call tomorrow, and get this young fella to give me a call tomorrow, and I'd like to talk to him about something." So the next morning, we went up to the top of Judge Street, Banksia, where there was a red phone booth, the old red phone booth, right opposite Reg Lindsay's house. Would you believe? Right smack bang opposite the front gate of Reg's house where he was living there, and Reg Lindsay that is, and put a penny in and dialed the number, and Johnny O'Keefe answered. And my mate said, "Go on, answer him. Tell him you're the kid who was singing a whole lot of shaking going on." So I said, "Well, my name's Johnny Hurley, and I was singing a whole lot of shaking." "Oh, how are you?" He said, "I want you to get in a cab." And he said, "You got a pencil or somewhere? Can you remember this address?" Anyway, he gave me this address in the eastern suburbs, and I said, I can't afford a cab to go all the way over there. And he said, don't worry, just go and get a cab. When you get here, he said, just come in and get me and I'll pay for the cab. So I did that. Went and got a cab, went over to the Princess Highway over the other side of Banksia railway station, hailed a cab. I said, I told the cab driver where I wanted to go, and he said, you got any money? And I said, no, I haven't, but Johnny O'Keefe's going to pay at the other end. And he said, oh yeah, pull the other legs. But anyway, he took me there, and sure enough, I went in, knocked on the door. It's Johnny O'Keefe. He said, g'day, Mr. O'Keefe, I'm Johnny Hurley. And the cab's out the front there, and the bill's extraordinarily high. Please go, I'll pay it. So we went out there, and would you believe, he even tipped the cabbie five quid. In those days, was an extraordinary amount, you know, of money. But anyway, so the cabbie and I became great friends from then on. And he'd come along every time he'd come along to one of my shows later on in life. He'd always come up and say, hey, remember me? I was the cabbie. Johnny gave me a 5 quid tip, remember? All that sort of thing. But anyway, they were great days. And so I went into John's home, and he had a beautiful white grand piano there. We sat down there for hours, and he said, I just want you to play all the songs that you know. And then he'd throw another song at me, and he said, you know this? And I said, oh yeah, I know that. So I play it on the piano and sing along and everything like that. And anyway, the long and the short of it was, the very next Saturday night, very next Saturday afternoon, I was on 6 O'Clock Rock on the ABC, and that was the big rock and roll television show at the time, along with Bandstand on Channel 9. And when we got to the studio, and after we finished rehearsing and everything like that, Johnny came into the dressing room and he said, you know, he said, Johnny Hurley doesn't really sound like a good rock and roll. He said, there's Johnny Red, there's Johnny Restivo, there's Johnny Devlin, there's Johnny, but Johnny Hurley doesn't sound any good. He said, I'm thinking, but anyway, he said, look, not only that, he said, you need a gimmick. He said, I've got the Kiss Curls, and Lucky Star's got the Star guitar, and Cold Joy runs his arm around the guitar and everything. Everyone's got to have a gimmick. And he said, I haven't thought of yours yet, but anyway, he said, look, come down to the wardrobe department. So we went down to the wardrobe department, and he said to the wardrobe mistress, he said, you got a pair of gloves that'll fit this young kid? I said, gloves? I said, what do you want me to do with the gloves? She said, no, wait in here. So the only pair of gloves that she could find that fitted my small hands at that stage were a pair of, how should I, really dirty old green gloves, and they had diamantes and sequins and everything on them. And I thought, oh God. He said, put them on. He said, so Johnny got all excited to put them on. So I put them on. And I said, I can't play the piano with these on. They're too clumsy. They're too. Anyway, he said, take them off. So I took them off, and he said to the wardrobe mistress, you got a pair of scissors? So she gave him a pair of scissors, and he got the gloves, and he cut the fingers out. And he said, now put them on. Now I had mittens, long before Michael Jackson and the Tune. But anyway, and he said to the wardrobe mistress, he said, what colour are they? And she said, oh, this sort of like a jade green colour. And he said, Jade Hurley, Jade Hurley. There's your new name, son. So he introduced me a couple of hours later, Jade Hurley on 6 O'Clock Rock, and I stuck. Hello, I'm Jade Hurley. Ex-Johnny Hurley.
Jade, when did you, that was a good story by the way, but when did you learn to play the guitar, play the piano and other instruments that you do play? Well,
one time when I was only I suppose, I don't know, probably about 12 or 13 I would have been, and every Sunday in those days, most families had a roast dinner, and we could never afford a roast leg of lamb because a leg of lamb is just too expensive. So Mum and Dad would go to the butcher shop, and they'd get a shoulder of lamb. So Mum was cooking a shoulder of lamb in the kitchen one afternoon, and she was a piano player herself. Now she wasn't a great piano player, but she was okay. But she had to read the music. She couldn't play by ear, and I had this knack of being able to hear like Buddy Holly or whoever it was on the old radiogram on the radio, and then I'd think, oh, I can play that, and sit down and play it and sing it. But Mum said to me one afternoon when she was cooking the shoulder of lamb and the baked dinner, she said, would you like to learn to play an instrument really proficiently? And I said, because I could muck around with the piano, and I learned looking over her shoulder, so basically I taught myself. I taught myself how to read, and by asking her questions. Oh, what does that figure mean on the sheet of paper, on the sheet of music, and all that? So I taught myself, but she gave me some options. She said, look, I think it'd be a great idea if you learned to play one instrument really proficiently. And the option she trotted out was to go to the nuns at Rockdale, St Joseph's Convent at Rockdale, where I'd started school in kindergarten, and learn to play the violin, or to go across the road to old Mrs Sullivan, who was a piano teacher. And I said, well, I can play the piano. I don't know how the hell you'd ever play Great Balls of Fire on the violin, so let's see if we can organise with Mrs Sullivan across the road to learn to play the piano properly, according to Mum. So 2 and 6 every Thursday. 2 and 6 was the cost. Every Thursday morning, early, about 7 or 7:30 in the morning, I would go diagonally across the road in Judge Street, Banksia, to old Mrs Sullivan, and have my piano lesson. But old Mrs Sullivan had this white pencil, and particularly in the middle of winter time, and she'd give me homework to do, and homework was scales and exercises, which I absolutely hated. And because I wanted to play Buddy Holly and Jerry Lee and Elvis and, you know, all of that. But anyway, every time I'd make a mistake on the piano, she'd hit me on the knuckles with this white pencil, which after a while I just wanted to kill her. And I said to Mum one day, because after a while this white pencil became like a tree stump. Bang! Every time I'd make a mistake, she'd whack me with this pencil, and it hurt like hell. So I said to Mum, this is months later, I said, look, I love Mrs Sullivan, but if she hits me one more time, if I make another mistake and she hits me with that bloody pencil, I am going to kill her. So I think we should really call it quits. So she agreed with that, thank God for Mrs Sullivan. And so I just went on teaching myself then, and I developed my own style of playing the piano. A lot of people say, oh, you impersonate Jerry Lee Lewis. And Little Richard, I don't do anything like that. I don't even sit at the piano like Jerry Lee. I don't play the piano like Jerry Lee. And indeed, that's the thing that attracted Johnny Cash to me many, many years later. And but that's another story, if you like. But that's how I learned to play the piano, not the violin, proficiently.
So who were your influences in music?
Influences in music was definitely Johnny O'Keefe. Here in Australia, I just had a great belief that we had just as good, if not better, talent than all the Americans. All the Americans were trotting out, well, you know, from all the legends, whether it be Buddy Holly or whoever it might happen to be. Ricky Nelson, oh gee, the Diamonds and all that. I mean, we had the Deltones, for God's sake. Who'd want to listen to the Diamonds? Well, it was a great song, Little Darling, wasn't it? But I suppose the comparison between Jerry Lee is a little bit warranted, if you like, to a certain degree, because Jerry Lee played piano. But just because someone played the guitar like Cole Joy didn't mean to say he was an Elvis Presley impersonator, because Elvis played the guitar as well. And that was likewise with myself. And as I said, I developed my own style of playing the piano. But influences, oh gee, there's so many. There's just so many. I'll never forget, I wrote a song called How I Lied many, many years ago, and indeed it was my first ever record for HMV. And I took that song into Joe Halford, who was then the A&R, Artist and Repertoire Manager, and decision maker at HMV Records, EMI Records in Sydney at the time, and he said, "Oh no," he said, "Look, the song's great, but he said you sound too much like Buddy Holly." And I'm going, "Oh, really? What's wrong with that?" You know. But anyway, it penalised me, so I became very, very aware of not to impersonate someone. Develop your own style. That's what I'd already done with the piano and with my singing as well, and everything like that. Many years later, about 2 years later, I once again presented exactly the same song to exactly the same man, Joe Halford. We've been great mates ever since. And he'd forgotten all about a couple of years earlier when he said, "No, you sound too much like Buddy Holly. It's a great song, but you sound like Buddy Holly." And all of a sudden this day he said, oh, that's a great song. He said, "Okay, we'll record it." So would you believe, by default, using the same song, got a contract with HMV EMI Records, and that was a pretty big hit for me all over Australia, and it's even on YouTube.
Now, Jade, in 1965, at the historic National Bandstand concert in Perth, now you know where I'm going here.
Oh yes.
Where women were literally screaming for you. You collapsed while introducing your next song. What exactly happened?
Well, what happened was we were doing a show. It was 1965, but the tour was called Sounds of 65, organised by John Harrigan, who was then managing Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, Ray Brown and the Whispers, Jade Hurley, Lynn Randell, and a couple of others. And it was the biggest tour of all Australian artists in Australian history. And the last show on the tour, because the tour was so successful and sold out everywhere, right across Australia, they even sent Brian Henderson over to put him on a plane, sent him over to Perth, Her Majesty's Theatre in Perth, to do Bandstand from Perth. And but when we were in Wollongong about 2 weeks before that, and in those days the kids used to get really enthusiastic, so much so that they'd sometimes pull you off the stage, and you know, it was unbelievable. But in Wollongong on the Sounds of 65 tour, I was pulled off stage, and I landed on one of my knees, and it hurt like hell. I found out later that I'd cracked the knee, something in my knee. Anyway, they took me to hospital in Wollongong, and they gave me painkillers. After Wollongong, the next show was Adelaide. Then after Adelaide, the next show was Perth, the final show on the tour in Perth, where they were doing, filming Bandstand. Well, I couldn't sleep because of the pain in my knee, number one, and number two, I was full of these, whatever painkillers they were in those days, I can't remember. But I couldn't sleep, and I was in awful pain. And when I went out on stage, I was announced on stage, ladies and gentlemen, Jade Hurley, and I went out there and I sang How I Lied. And after I finished How I Lied, I was then going to sit down at the piano and sing Great Balls of Fire. I did How I Lied, and my knee was hurting, and I was spinning out, and I didn't know what was going on. And then I sat down at the piano, and then all of a sudden I fell in a heap, and I can't remember what happened after that. I woke up in Royal North Perth Hospital, and after that needed a knee operation, and as soon as I got back to Sydney, which I did have, and anyway, I fractured something in the knee, but that was the story of that, and that's on YouTube as well for everyone to see, and I feel like a goose every time I look at it. But that's showbiz. The show always goes on. That's the whole point. The show always goes on. Max Merritt and the Medias were backing me on that show, on that bandstand show. Next thing, Max and the boys are coming over and they're dragging me off the side of the stage, and then it goes to black. So thank God for that.
Now, when you recorded your first recording session,
yep.
Can you actually remember being in that recording studio?
Well, I was on my way to EMI Studios, HMV Studios in Pitt Street in Sydney, and I was driving myself in there, and I was driving up King Street, Newtown, which is only still to this day, they can't change it because it's only a very narrow street. And I was driving up there, and halfway up there there's a bit of a right-hand bend, and in those days there were no lights, but now there are lights there. And I was going around the bend, and a car was coming down, and instead of going around the bend, kept going straight into me, and I had a head-on collision. And once, you're not going to believe it, once again, I wrecked my knee. So here I am, I'm booked in to record 4 songs, the 4 songs being How I Lied, another song that I wrote all the songs, the 4 songs, How to Love Me, which is the flip side of How I Lied, My Baby Judy, which I wrote about my first ever girlfriend, and the flip side of that was going to be a song called I Got a Kitten, which is the most dreadful song you'll ever hear in your life, so don't be worried about that. But here I've wrecked my knee again, way back then, and I'm on my way to record. There's nothing going to stop me from recording, so you wouldn't believe it, an ambulance came. And instead of taking me to hospital, I conned them into taking me to the studio in Pitt Street in Sydney. So I went in there and I limped in there and got through the 4 songs that afternoon, and there they are. I've Got a Kitten, and How to Love Me, My Baby Judy, and How I Lied. All on record.
Now, we spoke about Johnny O'Keefe a little while ago, the Wild One. He liked one particular song you've written, and he stated this, a song called Down on the Riverina.
Well, no, what he did, I'd been ripped off. In those days, young singers like myself and young performers trying to get on in the world of showbiz, there were a lot of scumbag promoters and agents around. And thank God they're all gone then. Most of them are dead. Anyway, but in those days there were a few not nice people, and I found myself being ripped off by not 1, not 2, but 3 of these people. How gullible was I? But anyway, so I thought to myself, well, there's no sense in staying in the world of show business if you're going to continue to be ripped off. So I thought, well, let's stay in the world of show business. And after touring, you know, from basically Cairns to Perth for a number of years, I found 2 places in Australia that I absolutely loved, and I look forward to going back. One was Perth as a city, the other one was Deniliquin in the Riverina. And so I thought to myself, hey, you know, I've got a half reasonable voice, and maybe I can get a job on radio as a disc jockey. That sounds a good idea. So I rang a few mates up at 6PR in Perth, which was the big radio station in those days, and also at 2QN Deniliquin. And I knew the manager there, Phil Charlie. And I said, okay, I'm interested in a job. Anytime you've got a vacancy and you think I can do something, I'd like to hear from you. 6 weeks later, I got a call from Phil Charlie at 2QN Deniliquin, and he said, get in the old FJ and come on down. I'll make you a disc jockey. So I went down there, and I was terrible. I lasted a week, and he sacked me. He couldn't afford to have me there any longer because I was making a goose of myself. I couldn't read the news. I was tragic. Anyway, so I stayed in Deniliquin for about 10 years. But all through this time, Johnny O'Keefe and I had remained good mates. And John, being the person that he was, if he could not sleep at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, no one else, if you were a close mate of his, you weren't going to sleep as well because you'd get a phone call from him. Oh God, so about 3 o'clock one morning I got a phone call from John, and he's pissed. And he said, you know, he said, you live in the Riverina and no one's ever written a song about the Riverina. Why don't you write some more Jade Hurley songs, but in particular write one about the Riverina? And I more or less laughed it off, but he rang back the following night with the same thing. I said, John, we talked about this last night. And he said, I know. But he said, the Riverina, he said, it's the richest province where all our rice comes from, everything like that, our grapes and everything like that. And he said, no one's ever written a song about So I went out and I wrote a song about the Riverina. So about a week later, I called John and I said, I recorded just on my old upright piano in my home in Deniliquin, and on a little old reel-to-reel recorder, this song, and I called it Down in the Riverina. And I said, John, I've written the song, it's called Down in the Riverina. And he, oh, that's great, that's fantastic. I said, would you like to hear it? He said, I've recorded it and I can play it down the phone line to you. So he said, okay. So I put the speaker, the phone down near the speaker, and I pressed the go button. And I sat back and I listened, and what I'd recorded Down in the Riverina, thinking that John's on the other end listening to the song. Well, the song finished, so I picked up the phone and I said, what do you think of that, mate? And all I heard was, he was sound asleep. And I thought, oh, you mongrel. So anyway, the long and the short of it was, he absolutely loved the song, and on the basis of that, he said, look, mate, he said, I've got a show coming up in Sydney. It's called The Good Old Days of Rock and Roll. He said, I've already booked it in the St George Lees Club in South Sydney, and we're going to Melbourne and Brisbane and all this sort of thing with this great show. And Lonnie Lee's going to be on it, and Digger Revelle's going to be on it, and Warren Williams, and all of these, Ray Hoff. And anyway, he said, what I want you to do, he said, I want you to come back to Sydney, and he said, I'll manage you, and you can go out and do every show that I do. You'll be my support act. And I'm going, here I am, happily ensconced in Deniliquin in the Riverina. By this time I was an alderman on the council, for God's sake. Hello, Alderman Hurley. And here's John persuading me to go back into the world of show business, which I'd left because I got ripped off too often. But he wanted to manage me, and he was such a convincer in everything that he did, that yes, he did. He convinced me to come back to Sydney. He managed me. We did the first show at St George Lees Club, and it was such a success for me because I was the only one on the show that played an instrument apart from the guitar. I played the piano and everything like that, and the show went really great for me. And so after that, I got all enthusiastic, and here's John saying, okay, as soon as these series of shows finish, every show that I do, you're going to be out there as my support. But it was one of those showbiz things that I'll cherish the rest of my life. And he went on to manage me, but it wasn't long after that, and that we did go our own separate ways. And his manager, John Hanson, then became my manager for a long time, and for about 25 years actually. One of the most successful artist and management arrangements, I think, in the history of Australian showbiz. It was a great success story.
Now, you seem to be a bloke who likes a good laugh in life. Now, particularly when it's at someone else's expense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm referring to a pet goanna.
Oh, yes, Aussie. Yeah.
Yeah, on stage.
Yeah, with Bob Rogers.
Can you tell us that?
I like a good laugh, and I see the funny side of a lot of things, and so many things have happened in showbiz down through the years. I mean, I'll never forget, I was doing a show at Lismore RSL Club, and in those days and I still do, I still drink what I call Jade's Elixir, because many years earlier I'd been booked to do 2 weeks of shows at Romano's nightclub in Perth, and it was the biggest venue in Perth. And when I got off the plane in Perth, I had laryngitis and I could hardly talk, let alone do 2 weeks of shows. And it was six shows a week for two, so there was 12 shows over the 2 week period. Here I was with laryngitis, getting off the plane, and Michael and Leetta, the managers of and owners of Romano's nightclub, were there at the airport to meet me. I said, I can't do it, I can't do it. And I had the show to do, to start the next night. And he said, Michael said to me, don't worry about it. He said, I'll get you through. He's a lovely Greek bloke and Greek couple, Michael and Leetta. So anyway, we went in the next day and we did sound checks and rehearsed with the band and everything like that. And I hardly sang because I couldn't. That night, the place is jam-packed full, and here it is, showtime, ladies and gentlemen. Almost showtime. Michael comes into the dressing room, and he says, "Look," he said, "have this," and he brought in a big glass of what I discovered later was a 50-50 mixture of Stone's green ginger wine, and the other 50% is brandy. And I thought, oh God, this is good. So I had a few swigs, and he said, now gargle. And so I gargled and everything, and all of a sudden my throat came good. And I thought, he said, I'll put a big glass down on the floor and at the corner of the piano there for you. Anytime you feel you're losing your throat, just pick it up, have a sip, and you'll be right. So that was all right. I did that for 2 weeks. Then I finally, and the shows were fantastic. I couldn't believe it. So I got on the plane and I came back to Sydney, and I got off the plane in Sydney. My wife was there and she said, how'd the shows go? And I said, I have no idea, I've been pissed for 2 weeks. And I was pickled for 2 weeks on this Stone's green ginger wine and brandy. So that gave me a great sense of humour for everything that is going to be tragic, turn it into a funny thing in showbiz. One night I was doing a show of which Bob Rogers was the compere at Manly Warringah Leagues Club in Sydney. And at that stage I was singing a song called The Battle of New Orleans, the Johnny Horton song, which I've also recorded. And I played the banjo in that. And in 1814, we took the little trip, there's the banjo down there still. Anyway, Bob Rogers, he introduced me. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia's King of Country Rock, because Johnny O'Keefe had given me that title of Australia's King of Country Rock. And Jade Hurley, so out I trots, and I'm out there, and I'm into the show. Anyway, I got my road manager to bring out the banjo case, and of course, everyone thinks I'm going to get the banjo out and play the Battle of New Orleans with the banjo. So I asked Bob this particular night to bring the banjo case out for me. So he brought it out and he put it on the floor, and he's standing there, and I said, oh, thanks very much, Bob, and I lifted up the lid of the case, and you wouldn't believe it. I had acquired a goanna, not a piano goanna, a goanna, tree climbing goanna, you know, with all the claws and the fangs and the teeth and the tongue and everything like that. And he was my pet, but you know, I wanted to play a practical joke on Bob this particular night. So I put Aussie in the banjo case, the goanna. Bob brings it out, puts it on the floor. I lift the lid up, grab Aussie, bring him out, and I plonked him on Bob's right shoulder, left shoulder, whatever. Well, I had no idea that Bob Rogers was absolutely terrified of anything reptile. And here he is with this, Aussie was about 3 foot. It was a big yellow striped Aussie goanna. And I've lobbed him on Bob's shoulder, and Bob was nearly pooed his pants, I must say. And anyway, so I grab Aussie, I think, oh, he's really distressed. So I grabbed Aussie, pull him off, and Bob storms off stage and he said, you'll never work with me again. So never ever did after that. I don't even know whether Bob ever played a Jade Hurley song after that on the radio. For all those years, I don't know. But we're still friends, and he has subsequently played a song. But that was one of the funniest things. And the audience just cracked up. They thought it was a great joke. Everyone thought it was the funniest joke ever, except Bob Rogers, Aussie the Goanna.
Jade, now I'm not sure what year it was, but you actually filled in for Jerry Lee Lewis one time.
Oh yeah. Well, fate plays a lot of funny tricks in your life. John Hanson, my then manager, was bringing of all people to Australia Jerry Lee Lewis for a tour, and the first show of the tour was Penrith Leagues Club. So he said to me, he said, "You want to come out and see the show?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great." So I picked John's wife Di up, and Barbara and myself, and my wife and myself. We got in the Volvo, and out we drove to Penrith. And anyway, so we're driving around. This is in the old Penrith Leagues Club, not the new one, of course, a long time ago now. And we drove around the corner of where the front entrance of the club was, and here's John Hanson and the secretary manager of the club out the front, and they saw me, and next thing they're waving me down. So I pulled over, and John came over to the car, and he's waiting like anything, and I thought, "Well, God, what's wrong?" And he said, "Well, you wouldn't believe it. Jerry Lee has taken a couple of sleeping tablets in his hotel room in Sydney, and they can't wake him up. So we don't have a show. We've got an audience full of it, sold out, 700 people or something like that, and it's all sold out. And Jerry Lee, his band's here. They've rehearsed and they've done lights and sound checks and everything like that. But no Jerry Lee. He can't get here because they can't wake him up. Will you do the show?" I'm going, "Oh, okay." So we drove around, found a parking spot, into the club we went. You wouldn't believe that fate played a second part in this particular night, because supporting Jerry Lee Lewis and using my band was Dinah Lee. So Jerry Lee's band is there, they're all ready to go. No Jerry Lee, Dinah Lee is there, ready to go with my band, and so here we're ready. So if I'm going to fill in with taking over from Jerry Lee on the night, Dinah still does the support. We have a break, and then I finish the show, and that's exactly what happened. And it was really wonderful, because Roger Cowan, the secretary manager, then secretary manager for many years of Penrith Leagues Club, he said, "You should be really proud of something that happened tonight, Jade." And I said, "What was that, Roger?" And he said, "Only 2 people asked for a refund out of about 700 who were there." And I thought, oh, that's nice. And the show was great. And Jerry Lee's band were in the wings and everything like that. And his band leader came up, chased me out after the show, and he said, "Hey, anytime you come to the States, just let us know. We'd love to back you over there." So, yeah, that's fate for you in showbiz.
And like Richie Valens, Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper, who were great entertainers, and they will never be forgotten so long as we keep on playing their music.
Yep.
I'm referring to a plane from Essendon.
Oh, God. Oh, you talk about history nearly revisiting itself in another form. I never ever got over the death of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens and the Big Bopper in that terrible plane crash. But we found ourselves, I was touring for a promoter in Geelong in Victoria called Bernie Stall, and Bernie and I were catching, my band had already gone down to Sale. We had a show at Sale, down the coast, the east coast of Victoria there, and that night and my band had already gone down in the bus to do sound checks and set up and everything like that. But Bernie and I, because we had a couple of radio interviews, live radio interviews to do in Melbourne for other shows, we were flying down. So we went out to then Essendon Airport, and we got this light plane, so in the light plane we get, and we think, oh, we're kings, we've got our own plane, and here we are, we're going to go down to sail and do the show that night, and everything's hunky-dory. Well, we took off, we got up in the air, and we're flying over the Melbourne city itself, which is only just down the road from Essendon, and one of the engines conked out, and we saw the pilot, and he was really concerned, and he's talking away, and he's talking into his microphone and everything, and we think, I said to Bernie, I said, I don't like this, something's wrong. So he then turned around and he said, we're turning back, one of the engines has failed. So we're turning around, we're going back. So he started to turn around, and we turned around, and eventually, and we're heading back to Essendon. And the other engine failed. So here we are, we're flying over Melbourne, the city's underneath us, for God's sake, nowhere to land except Essendon, which is up there somewhere. And we're gliding, because both engines failed. Anyway, we're gliding and gliding and gliding and gliding, and I thought, oh, I took all my rings off and I put them under the seat, and I thought, I took my nice watch off, put it under the seat. I thought, well, they're not going to burn up with me, they, you know, my family, I have something, they'll dig it out of the wreck or something. Anyway, you wouldn't believe it, but here's Essendon, you could see Essendon Airport coming up, and right at the end of Essendon Airport is the freeway, is this road, this freeway. And also right at the end of Essendon Airport, where it joins the freeway, or this main road then, were all these light tower things hanging up, you know, with all red lights and white lights and everything like that. Here we are gliding in, and I said to Bernie, I said, we're going to crash. We're definitely going to crash. We're either going to hit the road, hit one of these light stands or whatever. But this is Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bob. Who do you want to be today? I don't want to be anyone. Get us down. Well, you wouldn't believe it. We got over the top of the main road, over the top of those things, and it was a wonderful landing. What went wrong? They hid it from us. In those days, you never ever thought of suing or anything like that. But it was the most horrific situation, apart from one other instance where I was landing at Invercargill Airport in New Zealand, and that was the scariest, because we almost got down in Invercargill, and then off he shot again, and so we went up, and because where Invercargill Airport is oh God, that was horrific. I thought we were going to die there again. Buddy Holly revisited again, but Essendon Airport, that flying over, or should I say gliding over the Melbourne CBD with all these high-rise and everything like that poking out of the ground, and not a sound, no engines, was the most horrific 5 or 10 minutes of my life. Absolutely.
Now, Jade, fans can be unpredictable at times, and now I'm referring to an incident like, well, let's say, young Justin Bieber getting a bottle of water thrown at him on stage. Now, have you ever had that happen to you?
Well, I haven't had a bottle of water thrown at me, but I'll never forget when I was, I had a two-man show, just myself and a drummer, at the Imperial Hotel at Erskineville in Sydney. Now, the Imperial Hotel at Erskineville in Sydney now is a gay pub. Hello. So if you want to ever see anything gay, go to the Imperial Hotel at Erskineville. And but here we were. There was myself and a mate, Peter Cooling, who played drums on my first on How I Lied My Baby Judy at HMV Records in those days. He now lives in Thailand, But there we were rocking away. I had the old upright piano on the stage there, and we had a talent quest every Friday night. And there was this group of people, and they nominated one of the girls in the group to get up and sing. I think it was "Lipstick on a Collar," the old Connie Francis song. Well, she was so bad, it was ridiculous. She couldn't sing in tune. She didn't know the words. But anyway, they thought she was fantastic and should have won the talent quest. But we gave it to someone else. Next thing, one of the guys stood up and he had a big schooner of beer and he chucked it. And well, the beer went everywhere, all over Peter and myself and all over the piano and the drums and everything like that. Next thing, Peter's jumped over his drums and he's gone out there and he's king at this guy. Oh, my God. Now it's a gay pub. It wasn't too gay that night, I can assure you.
And Jade, you also were inducted into the Hands of Fame in New Zealand.
Oh yeah.
96?
1996, because of the fact that I identified, along with John Hanson in those days, my manager, and we were doing the Mike Walsh show, and that was tremendously successful for me for all those years. And because of that, I said to John one time, I said, "John, why don't we try and get a release with my Golden albums and Solid Gold albums and all that sort of thing off the Mike Walsh show and get a release through Festival Records in New Zealand?" Because to fly from Sydney to Auckland or to Christchurch was just like flying from Sydney to Adelaide, and certainly a lot shorter than flying from Sydney to Perth. So it made common sense to me if we could get a release of my records through Festival in New Zealand. And in those days, a lot of people, and they still do, a lot of Kiwis come over to Australia for their holidays. In those days, they'd come along to the club scene in Sydney, and they'd see guys like Jade Hurley and Ray Hoff and Frankie Davidson or whoever it might happen to be. And I developed this little bit of a following with a lot of visitors from Kiwi. And so when we got a release with my records over there, the records took off and went straight to #1. The first couple of records, and both of them have gone gold and platinum and double platinum in New Zealand. Both of my first ever 12-inch LPs. And so the Kiwis have become very, very, very vital to me. And down through the years, with many tours now, I've been recognised over there, with the Hands of Fame at the equivalent to what Tamworth, the Tamworth scene, country music scene in Australia is, Gore in the south, G-O-R-E, Gore, little township of Gore in the South Island of New Zealand is the same, and they have the Hands of Fame there. And my hands are right next to Ricky Skaggs. Ricky Skaggs is a great instrumentalist, banjo mandolin instrumentalist player in Nashville and singer. And so I'm right next to Ricky Gore, or Ricky Gore's right next to me, one of the two. But it's nice. Love the Kiwis.
And you've been working on a new album.
Yes, we've got a new album for the last 3 or 4 years have been pretty difficult for me, health-wise. I've had both my knees replaced. I had bladder and prostate problems, and I was lucky enough to get through that. And then after all of that, I had a massive bleed in my right knee, of which at 12 o'clock one night we had to call an ambulance to race me to St Vincent's Hospital. And I spent another week in St Vincent's Hospital. So the last 3 or 4 years, I haven't been touring. I haven't been doing much of anything. Just getting over all these legs and knee problems and stuff. But what getting off the road has done for me is given me the chance to sit at the studio and have a look at what I'm going to record and what I'm going to release into the future. And I recorded I don't know about 12 or 14 or 15 songs, I'm not sure. But they were really down. This has been a really down part of my life, if you like. And the songs that I chose to record reflected that. And when I'd finished the album, I even thought to myself, oh gee, this is really down, there's no up-tempo, exciting songs or anything like that. And I thought, I wonder if this is the sort of thing that people really want to hear from Jade Hurley. So I sent I burnt the album to CD and sent it out to a few disc jockey mates and others who I respected their opinion in the business, and every one of them rang me back or sent me an email and said, boring, you know, bloody terrible, you know, record Great Balls of Fire again, do anything, but don't release this. So I took that on board, and so the last 6 or 12 or 18 months I've spent in the studio recording, stuff that is going to be quite refreshing, to say the least. And if the album cover, which we've already shot, is any indication, people are going to be shocked. I'll leave it at that. But it will be a 2-album set, two CD set, one CD all country, the other CD all classics. And but classics from, not necessarily, there's a few from the 50s, a few from the 60s, a few from the 70s, and a few from the 80s, even one from the 90s. So, and that's almost ready to go now. Once you have a look at the album cover, you will say, okay, let's see what's inside now. I can hardly wait.
Well, Jade Hurley, thank you very much for this interview. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Drongo Jack.